Millionaire CEO saves beautiful woman in the hospital until she opens her eyes and falls in love. Just before we start, I'm curious, what time is it where you are, day or night? I'm grateful you're here. The rain hammered against the windows of St. Mary's Hospital like bullets of ice as Alexander Westbrook burst through the automatic emergency doors, his $1,000 Italian suit soaked completely through and his heart pounding with an urgency he'd never experienced in his 35 years of life. As the CEO of Westbrook Industries, he commanded billion-dollar deals with ice-cold precision, controlled boardrooms filled with the world's most powerful executives, negotiated mergers that could topple governments. But tonight, nothing in his extensive experience could have prepared him for what lay ahead in room 314. The emergency ward was a symphony of controlled chaos, monitors beeping incessantly, medical staff rushing between rooms with practiced efficiency, the sharp smell of antiseptic mixing with the metallic scent of blood and fear. Alexander's expensive leather shoes squeaked against the polished linoleum floors as he followed the trail of destruction his life had just taken. "This way, sir," the head nurse called out, her voice cutting through the organized pandemonium of Saturday night trauma cases. Alexander's hands trembled, something that never happened during high-stakes negotiations, where millions hung in the balance as he followed her down the sterile corridor, lined with the sounds of beeping machines, whispered prayers, and hushed conversations between exhausted medical staff pulling double shifts. Through the partially open door of room 314, he could see her. The woman from the accident lay motionless on the hospital bed, her long auburn hair spread across the white pillow, like liquid silk catching the harsh fluorescent lights. Even unconscious, even with white bandages covering her arms and a nasty gash splitting her forehead, she was breathtakingly beautiful in a way that made Alexander's chest tighten with emotions he couldn't name or understand. Her face was peaceful despite the trauma, with high cheekbones, full lips slightly parted as she breathed, and skin that seemed to glow with an inner light even in her unconscious state. Alexander had been driving his black Mercedes behind her powder blue Honda sedan when the drunk driver in the stolen pickup truck ran the red light at the busy intersection of 5th and Main Street. He'd watched in absolute horror, time seeming to slow to a crawl, as her car spun violently off the road, metal crunching and screaming against the concrete barrier that separated the road from the steep embankment below. The sound of breaking glass and twisting metal would haunt his dreams for weeks to come. Will she be okay? "Please tell me she's going to be all right," he whispered desperately to Dr. Martinez, a distinguished man in his 50s who was carefully checking her vitals with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen far too much trauma in his career. "She suffered a severe concussion from the impact with the steering wheel, and we've detected significant internal bleeding from where the seatbelt caught her during the spin. The next 48 hours will be absolutely critical for her recovery and survival. Are you family?" "Why, sir, a boyfriend or husband perhaps. I was there when it happened. I was the one who called 911 and stayed with her until the ambulance arrived." Alexander couldn't explain why he felt so deeply responsible for this beautiful stranger, why the thought of leaving her side felt like abandoning his own soul to darkness. "I held her hand in the ambulance. She kept asking for someone to stay with her." The doctor nodded sympathetically, understanding flooding his experienced eyes that had seen countless families destroyed by drunk drivers and senseless accidents. "She's stable for now, but barely. We've done everything medically possible: stop the internal bleeding, reduce the brain swelling, set her broken ribs. Sometimes, though, patients need something more than medicine to pull through. They need a reason to fight, a connection to the world of the living." As the long hours passed like centuries, each minute feeling like an eternity of waiting and hoping, Alexander found himself talking to her unconscious form, sharing secrets he never told another living soul. He told her about building his empire from absolutely nothing, starting with a borrowed $1,000 and a dream, about the crushing loneliness that all his success couldn't fill, about the empty penthouse apartment and the meaningless relationships with women who only wanted his money. He spoke about how he never believed in fate or destiny or any kind of higher power until this very moment, until he saw her face in the wreckage and knew his life had changed forever. He held her delicate hand gently, surprised by how perfectly it seemed to fit in his larger one, as if they'd been carved from the same piece of stone by a master sculptor. Her fingers were long and elegant, with calluses that spoke of honest work and a small scar on her thumb that made him wonder about her childhood, her dreams, her fears. "My name is Alexander Westbrook. he whispered into the quiet room, his voice barely audible above the steady rhythm of the machines keeping her stable. I know you don't know me, but I promise you're going to be all right. I don't care what it takes, how much it costs, or who I have to call. You're not going to die on my watch. Whatever it takes, I'll make sure you get through this. The clock on the wall seemed to mock him as it ticked away the precious seconds of her life. Alexander had never felt so helpless, so completely out of control. In the business world, everything could be bought, negotiated, or leveraged. But here, in this sterile room that smelled of disinfectant and hope, money meant nothing. Only miracles mattered now. At exactly 3:47 a.m., something truly miraculous happened that would change both their lives forever and set them on a path neither could have imagined. Her eyelids fluttered like butterfly wings awakening from a long winter, and slowly, deliberately, the most beautiful chocolate brown eyes he'd ever seen open and found his emerald green ones. For a moment that felt like eternity suspended in amber, they simply stared at each other across the divide between life and death. Souls recognizing souls across time and space. You stayed, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but filled with wonder and something that sounded like relief. Her eyes were clearer than they should have been for someone who'd suffered such severe head trauma. I couldn't leave, he replied with complete honesty, and in that profound moment, Alexander Westbrook, the man who controlled everything and everyone around him with ruthless efficiency, realized his heart was no longer his own. It belonged to this mysterious woman whose name he didn't even know yet. What's your name? Alexander asked softly, his voice hoarse from hours of whispered prayers and one-sided conversations, still holding her hand as the first rays of dawn broke through the hospital windows, painting the sterile room in shades of gold and hope that seemed to dance across her face. Elena, she replied, her voice growing stronger with each word, more melodious than he'd expected. Elena Rodriguez. I remember. The accident. The drunk driver running the red light. You were in the black Mercedes behind me, weren't you? You had your emergency flashers on, and you were honking to warn me. Alexander nodded, amazed that she remembered those terrifying details with such clarity despite her head injury. The paramedics told me you kept asking about the man who called for help. During the entire ambulance ride here, that was me. I rode with you to make sure you were okay. Held your hand when you were crying. Elena tried to sit up, wincing slightly from the sharp pain that shot through her cracked ribs like lightning. You saved my life. If you hadn't been there to call for help so quickly, if you hadn't insisted they rush me to the trauma center instead of the closer community hospital. Don't think about that now, Alexander said gently, carefully helping her settle back against the pillows, his touch sending strange warmth through her body. The doctor says you need complete rest to heal properly. Your body has been through tremendous trauma, Doctor. Martinez returned with Elena's latest test results, his weathered face breaking into a genuinely relieved smile that transformed his usually serious, professional expression. Behind him trailed two nurses and a radiologist, all wearing expressions of amazed confusion. Miss Rodriguez, your scans look absolutely remarkable. The swelling in your brain has reduced significantly overnight, and your internal bleeding has stopped completely. Your broken ribs seem to be healing at an accelerated rate. It's honestly highly unusual. We expected much worse given the severity of your injuries and the mechanism of trauma. Elena's eyes never left Alexander's handsome face, studying every detail of the strong jawline covered with a day's worth of stubble. The concern etched around his intelligent eyes, the way his expensive suit was wrinkled from spending the night in an uncomfortable hospital chair. There was something in his presence that made her feel safe, protected in a way she'd never experienced before, even with men she'd dated for months or years. Will you stay a little longer? She asked, hoping she didn't sound desperate or needy. I know you probably have important business to attend to. Alexander had 3 crucial board meetings scheduled for this morning, including one with Japanese investors who had flown halfway around the world, specifically to meet with him. He had a multi-million-dollar merger to finalize that would make the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and a team of lawyers waiting to close a deal that had taken 6 months to negotiate. His assistant, Margaret, had already called twice, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. None of it mattered anymore. As long as you need me to, he said without hesitation, the business world can wait. Over the next several hours, they talked like old friends who had been separated by time and circumstance, but were finally reunited. Elena told him about her job as a kindergarten teacher at Roosevelt Elementary, how she'd been driving home from her school's annual fundraising dinner where they'd raised money for new playground equipment when the accident occurred. She spoke about her 5-year-old students with such love and enthusiasm that Alexander found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in months. Alexander found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone about growing up in the foster care system, never knowing his parents, building his business empire from absolutely nothing through sheer determination and 18-hour workdays, the profound emptiness that all his success couldn't seem to fill, no matter how many zeros were added to his net worth. "You're not what I expected," Elena said thoughtfully, studying his face with intense curiosity and something that looked like growing affection. "What did you expect from someone like me? Someone cold, calculating, distant, all business and no heart, like the CEOs you read about in Forbes magazine. But your eyes," she paused, delicate color rising in her cheeks like a sunset, "they're incredibly kind, really, truly kind. And when you look at me, I feel like you actually see me, not just what I look like or what I might be able to do for you." Alexander felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, like tectonic plates moving deep underground, like puzzle pieces falling into perfect alignment after a lifetime of being scattered. At 35, he dated countless models, actresses, and socialized women who wanted his money, his status, his connections, his ability to open doors that couldn't open themselves, but none had ever looked at him the way Elena did, like she could see straight through to his soul and actually like what she found there. As visiting hours officially ended and the evening shift began taking over, Alexander reluctantly stood to leave, every fiber of his being wanting to stay and protect this remarkable woman who had somehow captured his heart in less than 24 hours. "I'll be back first thing tomorrow morning," he promised, already planning to rearrange his entire schedule around her recovery. "Promise?" Elena asked, her voice suddenly small and vulnerable, like a child afraid of being abandoned. "I promise," he said firmly, meaning it more than any business contract he'd ever signed. But as he walked slowly to his car through the hospital parking garage, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls, Alexander had absolutely no idea that Elena harbored a devastating secret about her health that would change everything between them and challenge everything he thought he knew about the nature of reality itself. The next morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Elena's mood as she stared at her reflection in the small hospital mirror, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she touched the bandage covering the ugly gash on her forehead. She looked different somehow, not just from the physical trauma of the accident, but from something much deeper, something she couldn't begin to explain or understand. Her skin seemed to glow with an inner light. Her eyes were brighter and clearer than they'd been in months, as she felt a strange energy coursing through her veins like electricity. When Alexander arrived precisely at 8 a.m. with fresh white roses, her favorite flowers, though she couldn't remember telling him that, and her favorite coffee from the expensive cafe downtown, somehow knowing she loved caramel macchiatos with extra foam and a dash of cinnamon, Elena felt that strange flutter in her chest again, stronger and more intense than before. "You didn't have to do this," she said, accepting the warm cup gratefully and inhaling the familiar, comforting aroma that reminded her of weekend mornings and simpler times. "This coffee is from Bella's downtown, isn't it? That's 20 minutes away in traffic." "I wanted to," Alexander said simply, settling into the uncomfortable chair beside her bed that he was beginning to think of as his personal spot. Elena noticed how he seemed more relaxed than yesterday, like being in this hospital room brought him a peace he couldn't find anywhere else in his high-pressure world of mergers and acquisitions. "I asked the nurses what you might like, and they mentioned you've been talking about that cafe in your sleep, Alexander." She began very carefully, setting down her coffee with trembling hands. "I need to tell you something important. Something about what happened to me before the accident. About why I was in the medical district that night instead of taking my usual route home." His piercing green eyes focused intently on her face, giving her his complete and undivided attention in a way that made her feel like the most important person in the world. "What do you mean exactly?" Elena took a deep, shaky breath, gathering courage she didn't know she possessed for the confession that could change everything between them. 3 months ago, she'd been diagnosed with Stargardt disease, a rare genetic condition that was slowly but inevitably stealing her sight, leaving her world growing dimmer and more blurred with each passing day. The doctors at the University Medical Center had given her 6 months before complete blindness would set in permanently, turning her world into endless darkness. She'd been driving home from yet another specialist appointment when the accident occurred, another dead end. Another doctor telling her there was absolutely nothing they could do to save her vision. No experimental treatments, no hope. But now, looking directly at Alexander's concerned face, studying every detail from his worried expression to the way his hair fell across his forehead, her vision seemed clearer and sharper than it had been in months. She could see things she shouldn't be able to see: the individual threads in his expensive shirt, the gold flecks in his green eyes, the faint scar on his left temple that spoke of some childhood accident. "I've been very sick," she said simply, unable to meet his eyes, afraid of what she might see there. "Seriously, progressively sick. That's the real reason I was at the hospital district last night. Instead of taking Fifth Street home like usual, I'd just come from seeing Dr. Harrison, a retinal specialist, about my degenerative condition that's been destroying my eyesight." Alexander's face went completely pale, all color draining from his features like water running out of a broken dam. "What kind of condition are we talking about? Is it treatable?" Before Elena could find the courage to answer, to tell him about the inevitable blindness awaiting her, Dr. Martinez burst into the room with her latest test results. His expression one of complete bewilderment and professional confusion that bordered on disbelief. "Miss Rodriguez, I need to ask you something very important, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you been experiencing any significant vision problems recently? Any blurriness, blind spots, difficulty seeing colors, problems with night vision, or progressive vision loss?" Elena's heart stopped beating for several terrifying seconds. "Why would you ask me that specifically, doctor?" "Because according to your detailed medical records that we obtained from Dr. Harrison's office, you were definitively diagnosed with Stargardt disease just 3 months ago. It's a progressive genetic condition that causes irreversible vision loss, particularly affecting central vision and color perception. The disease damages the macula and is considered incurable by current medical standards." Dr. Martinez paused, looking at his clipboard and then back at Elena with an expression that suggested he was questioning his own sanity. "But your comprehensive retinal scans from last night, including high-resolution imaging and genetic testing that we ran as a precaution, show absolutely no trace of the disease, none whatsoever. No damage to the macula, no genetic markers, no scarring, no indication that you ever had the condition at all. It's as if the disease never existed in your body." The room fell into complete, stunned silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. Alexander looked back and forth between Elena and the doctor, confusion and something that looked distinctly like fear flickering across his handsome features. "That's medically impossible," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible above the steady beeping of the monitors around her bed. "I've been practicing ophthalmology and emergency medicine for 25 years. Dr. Martinez continued, shaking his head in amazement while flipping through her charts. "I've consulted with 3 other specialists since yesterday. I've never seen anything remotely like this in my entire career. It's as if the disease simply vanished completely from your system overnight, like it was erased by some force we don't understand." As the impossible implications began to sink in, Elena felt Alexander's strong hand tighten protectively around hers, his skin warm against her cold fingers. But instead of joy or relief at her miraculous recovery, she saw deep worry and something that looked like recognition creeping into his beautiful eyes. Because impossible things didn't just happen randomly in the real world, and when they did occur, there was always a significant price that had to be paid. Consequences that rippled out like stones thrown into still water. "I don't understand what's happening to me," Elena whispered after Dr. Martinez left with promises to run additional tests and consult with specialists at Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic, her voice barely audible above the steady, rhythmic beeping of the various monitors surrounding her bed like electronic sentinels. Alexander stood silently by the large window, his broad shoulders tense with worry as he stared out at the bustling city skyline below. The morning sun had burned through the gray clouds, casting long, dramatic shadows across his face and highlighting the sharp angles of his strong jaw, and the new worry lines that had appeared seemingly overnight. His reflection in the glass looked like a man wrestling with demons he couldn't name. "Talk to me, Alexander, please. You've been completely quiet since the doctor told us about my eyes, about the impossible recovery. I can see the wheels turning in your head." He turned slowly to face her, and Elena was struck once again by how absolutely beautiful his emerald eyes were, like precious stones that had been polished by centuries of ocean waves. catching and reflecting light in ways that seemed almost supernatural. But now they held something else entirely, genuine fear mixed with deep concern. At what looked like guilty knowledge, Elena, what if this isn't actually a miracle from God? What if something else entirely is happening here, something we don't understand and can't control? What exactly do you mean by that? You're starting to scare me. Alexander approached her hospital bed slowly, almost cautiously, as if afraid that getting too close to her might trigger something dangerous or unpredictable. I've built my entire fortune on logic, on understanding cause and effect in business and in life. Markets rise and fall for reasons. People make decisions based on motivations. But people don't just get completely cured overnight from supposedly incurable genetic diseases without some kind of intervention. Elena felt a cold chill run down her spine despite the warm hospital room and the heated blankets the nurses had provided. Are you actually saying you think I'm lying about being sick? That I made up having Stargardt disease? No, Alexander said quickly, reaching desperately for her hand with an urgency that surprised them both. I believe every single word you've told me. Your medical records are real. The diagnosis was real. The progression of your disease was documented by multiple specialists. That's exactly what scares me most about this situation. The moment their skin made contact, Elena felt that same strange, inexplicable warmth she'd been experiencing since first waking up and seeing his face hovering over her like a guardian angel. It seemed to pulse and flow between them like electricity, like a current that connected them on some fundamental level that transcended normal human experience. Over the next few hours, as the hospital bustled with its daily routine of shift changes and medical rounds, Elena found herself carefully studying Alexander when he wasn't looking directly at her. There was definitely something different about him too, something she couldn't quite identify or put her finger on. The way other patients seemed noticeably calmer and more peaceful. When he passed by their rooms in the hallway, their monitors showing improved vital signs. How the usually stern, no-nonsense nurses smiled warmly and genuinely at him, lingering to chat when they normally rushed through their duties. Even the wilted, dying flowers that other patients had received had somehow bloomed fuller and more vibrant since his arrival yesterday, as if his very presence brought life to dying things. When lunch was delivered to her room by a cheerful volunteer, Elena watched with growing fascination as Alexander unconsciously reached out and touched the weathered hand of the elderly man. In the bed directly next to her's a patient named Mr. Thompson who'd been moaning constantly in obvious pain from advanced pancreatic cancer all morning long. Suddenly, almost immediately after Alexander's touch, the man's labored breathing eased significantly, his face relaxed for the first time in days. And for the first time since Elena had arrived at the hospital, he slept peacefully and quietly. Alexander, Elena said very carefully, choosing her words with precision. Can I ask you something deeply personal about your past? Absolutely anything you want to know. I don't want there to be secrets between us. Have you ever noticed strange, unexplainable things happening around you throughout your life? Things that can't be logically explained by normal science or reason. Things that made you feel different from other people. Alexander's face went completely pale, all color draining away instantly like blood fleeing from a mortal wound. He sat down heavily in the chair beside her bed, running both hands through his thick, dark hair in obvious distress. Why would you ask me something like that? What makes you think? Because Elena said softly, reaching out and taking his trembling hand in both of hers. I think we're more deeply connected than either of us realizes or understands. And I think whatever is happening to me, whatever cured my incurable disease overnight, is somehow connected directly to you and whatever you are. As their hands intertwined completely, both of them felt it simultaneously a warm, pulsing energy that seemed to flow back and forth between them like a living current, like electricity made of pure life force. In that profound moment, Elena knew with absolute certainty that their meeting wasn't a random accident caused by a drunk driver. It was destiny, fate, something that had been written in the stars long before either of them was born. But what kind of destiny required such an impossible, dangerous price? That evening, as the hospital settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm with dimmed lights, hushed voices, and the soft shuffle of nurses making their rounds, Alexander found that he absolutely could not bring himself to leave Elena's side. He completely rearranged his entire schedule, canceling crucial meetings, postponing multi-million-dollar deals, something that would have been utterly unthinkable just a week ago. His frantic assistant Margaret had called 11 times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails about angry investors and missed opportunities. His international business partners were furious about the delays, threatening to take their money elsewhere. None of it mattered anymore. "Tell me about your childhood," Elena said softly, breaking the comfortable, peaceful silence that had fallen between them like a warm blanket woven from shared understanding. "I want to know everything about you, especially the things you've never told anyone else." Alexander hesitated for a long moment, his jaw clenching with old pain. He never talked about his traumatic past with anyone, not with business partners, not with the women he dated, not even with his closest advisors who handled his most sensitive deals. The memories were locked away in a vault he built in his mind, sealed with years of success and willful forgetting. But something about Elena's gentle, understanding brown eyes made him want to share absolutely everything with her, to open that vault and let the light in. "I was abandoned at St. Joseph's Children's Home when I was barely 3 years old," he began slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was winter, snowing hard, and someone left me on the steps in the middle of the night. The nuns told me years later that my mother left me there with nothing but a hastily written note that said, 'Please keep him safe. He's special, but I can't protect him anymore.' I never knew my father, never even knew his name or what he looked like." Elena's soft hand found his in the dim light of the room, her fingers interlacing with his as if they'd been doing this for years. That must have been incredibly lonely and frightening for such a young child. It was devastating. I cried for weeks, waiting for her to come back. But there was something else, something I've never told another living soul in all these years. Alexander paused, gathering courage for the confession he carried alone for over 30 years. The secret that had shaped every day of his life. "Strange things happened around me constantly. Things that scared the other children and worried the nuns. When other kids got hurt playing in the courtyard, broken bones, deep cuts, concussions, I'd instinctively touch them and somehow they'd feel completely better within hours. Sister Margaret said I had healing hands, but she made me promise never to tell anyone else about it, said people wouldn't understand." Elena's breath caught audibly in her throat, her pulse quickening as pieces of an impossible puzzle began falling into place. "Alexander, plants grew bigger and healthier in the garden when I helped tend them during my chores. Vegetables that should have taken months to grow would be ready for harvest in weeks. Sick animals at the shelter where I volunteered seemed to recover much faster. When I was around caring for them, dogs with parvo, cats with feline leukemia, birds with broken wings. I told myself it was all coincidence, just my imagination running wild, just good timing. When I got older and started focusing on business, I buried myself completely in logical things that made perfect sense, things I could control and understand. But it never actually went away, did it?" Alexander shook his head slowly, staring down at their joined hands. "I learned to suppress it, to ignore it completely, to pretend it didn't exist. I avoided hospitals, nursing homes, anywhere that sick people might be. I built walls around myself with money and success, thinking that if I became powerful enough, rich enough, important enough, I could somehow make myself normal, until—" He looked directly into her eyes with intense vulnerability. "Until I met you." Elena sat up straighter in her hospital bed, her heart racing with anticipation and fear, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff looking down into an abyss that might swallow her whole. "What do you think this means for both of us?" "I think," Alexander said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, "that I'm not entirely human. Maybe I never was, and somehow, being close to you is making whatever I truly am much, much stronger. The healing ability I've spent 30 years trying to suppress is coming back full force." Before Elena could respond to this earth-shattering revelation, that changed everything she thought she knew about the world. The overhead lights in the room flickered mysteriously, dimming and brightening in a pattern that seemed almost like a heartbeat. Down the hall, they could hear excited, amazed voices from the medical staff. Apparently, Mrs. Patterson's severe pneumonia had suddenly cleared up completely overnight. Mr. Chen's badly broken hip was mysteriously healing weeks ahead of schedule. And the little girl in pediatrics, who'd been born with a heart defect, was showing signs of spontaneous improvement that had her doctors calling it a miracle. Elena squeezed Alexander's strong hand tighter, feeling the energy that flowed between them grow stronger. "Maybe we're both something far more than human. Maybe that's why fate brought us together in such a dramatic way." As if responding directly to her words, the completely wilted roses on her nightstand flowers that had been brown and dying just hours before suddenly bloomed into full, vibrant life. their sweet, intoxicating scent filling the entire room with the perfume of impossible springtime. Both Elena and Alexander stared at the absolutely impossible sight in stunned silence, finally realizing that their lives had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous than either had ever imagined possible. 3 days later, Elena was officially declared medically cleared to leave the hospital a complete recovery. That had the entire medical staff baffled, amazed, and talking in hushed, confused whispers throughout the corridors. Dr. Martinez had called in specialists from 3 different universities, all of whom left shaking their heads in bewilderment. As Alexander helped her carefully gather her few personal belongings, Elena couldn't shake the growing feeling that leaving this safe hospital room meant stepping into a world that would never understand or accept what they were becoming together. "Where will you go now?" Alexander asked, his voice carefully neutral and controlled. But Elena could easily see the hope and longing hidden deep in his expressive green eyes, along with something that looked like fear. "Back to my small apartment on Maple Street, I suppose. Back to teaching kindergarten and pretending everything is normal. That I'm still the same person I was a week ago." Elena paused, suddenly realizing how empty and meaningless that old life now seemed, like a black and white photograph compared to the vivid colors of her new reality. "What about you? Back to your business empire and boardroom battles." Alexander was quiet for a very long moment, staring out the window at the city he conquered through sheer will and determination, the skyline dotted with buildings that bore his company's name. "Elena, I know this is absolutely crazy. We've known each other for less than a week. But I honestly can't imagine going back to my old life now. Not after this. Not after you. Everything that used to matter, the money, the power, the deals, it all feels empty now." Elena's heart fluttered like a trapped bird trying to escape a cage. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that for the first time in my entire life. I want to be somewhere just because it makes me genuinely happy, not because it makes me richer or more powerful or more successful." Alexander stepped closer, his large hand cupping her cheek with infinite gentleness, his thumb tracing the line where her bandage had been. "I want to be wherever you are, for as long as you'll have me. I want to help you figure out what's happening to us." Elena leaned into his warm touch, marveling at how perfectly right it felt, like coming home after a lifetime of being lost in the wilderness. "Alexander, what if what's happening to us gets even stronger? What if we can't control these abilities? What if people find out and try to use us, or worse, try to stop us? Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. We'll be careful. We'll be smart about it." As they prepared to leave the hospital that had brought them together in such a dramatic way, Dr. Martinez approached with Elena's final discharge papers and an expression of deep puzzlement, mixed with professional curiosity and what looked like genuine concern. "Miss Rodriguez, Mr. Westbrook, I have to ask you something important before you leave. Are you planning to stay in close contact with each other?" "Why do you ask, Doctor?" Elena replied, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because in my 25 years of medical practice, I've never seen anything remotely like what's happened here this week. 7 different patients have experienced completely unprecedented recoveries that defy medical explanation. Blood tests that should have shown cancer markers came back clean. Bones that should have taken months to heal are already mended. Genetic conditions that shouldn't be curable have simply vanished. The only common factor seems to be extended proximity to both of you." Elena and Alexander exchanged meaningful glances, understanding passing between them without words. They definitely weren't the only ones who had noticed a pattern of impossible healings. "Doctor," Alexander said very carefully, his business instincts kicking in, "what would you do if you discovered something that could potentially help many people, but it defied everything you thought you knew about medicine and science? Something that could change the world, but might also be dangerous in the wrong hands." Dr. Martinez studied them both intently for a long, tense moment, his eyes moving back and forth between their faces as if trying to read their souls. "I'd be extremely careful about who I told, and I probably want to understand it much better before word got out to the wrong people. There are those who would exploit such a gift, and others who would fear it enough to try to destroy it." As they walked together toward the hospital exit, Elena slipped her hand naturally into Alexander's strong one, feeling the familiar warmth and energy pass between them like a promise of things to come. "Are you ready for whatever comes next?" Alexander squeezed her hand firmly, feeling that familiar, wonderful warmth that had become as necessary to him as breathing. Outside, the sun was shining brilliantly through the windows, And Elena's vision was absolutely perfect, better than it had ever been in her entire life. Whatever they were, whatever this incredible power meant, they would face it together. But neither of them noticed the dark sedan that had been parked across from the hospital's main entrance for 3 straight days, or the dangerous-looking man inside taking detailed photographs of their every move and conversation with a telephoto lens. They didn't see him make a phone call as they walked toward Alexander's car, or hear him say in a cold, professional voice, "I found them." The subjects matched the parameters exactly. "Yes, sir." Both of them. "We should move soon before they realize what they're capable of." As Alexander helped Elena into his Mercedes, both of them felt the weight of destiny settling around their shoulders like an invisible cloak. Their new life together was about to begin. But so was the danger that would chase them for the rest of their days. The weeks after leaving the hospital, Elena stood in the kitchen of Alexander's penthouse apartment, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold through floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd moved in after her own apartment felt too small, too ordinary for the extraordinary life she was now living. Everything had changed, including her. "The children at school keep asking me why I look different," Elena told Alexander as he emerged from his home office, looking exhausted. He'd been working from home, unable to concentrate in boardrooms when his mind was consumed with worry about their growing abilities. "Different how?" Alexander asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind, immediately feeling that familiar warm flow between them. "Brighter, they say. Like I'm glowing from the inside." Elena leaned back against his chest, marveling at how safe she felt in his embrace. "Yesterday, little Tommy Martinez scraped his knee during recess. I helped him up, and by the time we reached the nurse's office, there wasn't even a mark left on his skin." Alexander's jaw tightened with concern. "Elena, we talked about this. We have to be more careful. I know, but it's getting harder to control every day. The power feels stronger." Elena turned in his arms to face him. "What happened in your meeting yesterday? You've been tense ever since." Alexander hesitated. During his video conference with the Tokyo investors, one of them had mentioned feeling remarkably energized after their call, how his chronic back pain had mysteriously disappeared. Another had joked about how his dying office plants had somehow bloomed overnight. After their virtual meeting, nothing concrete. "But I think people are starting to notice things around me too." Alexander cupped her face gently. "Maybe we should consider Dr. Martinez's advice about keeping a low profile." Elena was about to respond when her phone rang. The caller ID showed St. Mary's Hospital. "Miss Rodriguez." It was Dr. Martinez, and his voice was strained with urgency. "I need you and Mr. Westbrook to come in immediately. We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "There are people here asking questions about you both. Official-looking people with badges and very specific questions about unusual patient recoveries. They know things they shouldn't know." Elena's blood ran cold. "We'll be right there." As they rushed to get dressed, neither Elena nor Alexander noticed the black van that had been parked across the street from Alexander's building for the past 3 days, or the sophisticated surveillance equipment inside monitoring their every conversation. Dr. Richard Kane, director of a classified government research facility, smiled coldly as he listened to the recording of their phone call. "Perfect," he murmured to his assistant. "They're walking right into our trap." The hunt for the miracle healers was about to begin. St. Mary's Hospital felt different when Elena and Alexander arrived 30 minutes later. Security guards they'd never seen before stood at strategic positions, and there was a tension in the air that made Elena's skin crawl. Dr. Martinez met them at a side entrance, his face pale with worry. "Thank God you came quickly," he whispered, leading them through a maze of back corridors. "They arrived this morning, 3 men and a woman, all wearing identical black suits. They claimed to be from the Department of Health Services, but their questions," he shook his head, "they're asking about specific patients, specific recovery times, and they seem to know exactly which cases to focus on." "What did you tell them?" Alexander asked, his business instinct sensing danger. "Nothing. I cited patient confidentiality laws, but they have a court order." "Alexander, they're compelling us to release medical records for anyone who showed unusual recovery patterns. During the week you were both here." Elena grabbed Alexander's hand instinctively, feeling the familiar warmth pass between them. Stronger now when she was afraid. "Can they do that legally?" "Apparently they can." Dr. Martinez led them into his private office and locked the door. But that's not the worst part. They brought something with them, some kind of scanning device. They'd been testing the air quality. radiation levels, even electromagnetic fields in the rooms where the miraculous recoveries occurred. Alexander felt his blood pressure spike. What kind of government agency tests for electromagnetic fields in a hospital? The kind that knows exactly what they're looking for, Dr. Martinez said grimly. There's more. They asked specifically about you both by name. They have photographs. Alexander, recent photographs of you both leaving the hospital together. Elena sank into a chair, her mind racing. How could they possibly know about us? We've been so careful. Have you? Dr. Martinez asked gently. Elena, every child in your kindergarten class has been in perfect health since you returned to work. No colds, no flu, no playground injuries that don't heal instantly. And Alexander, your business associates have been calling me directly, asking what kind of executive health program you've been using. The weight of their carelessness hit them both. Simultaneously, they'd been so focused on hiding their abilities from strangers that they'd overlooked how their presence was affecting everyone around them. We need to leave, Alexander said, standing abruptly, right now. But as Dr. Martinez reached for the door handle, it turned from the outside. The door opened to reveal a tall woman, with steel gray hair and cold blue eyes flanked by two large men in black suits. Mr. Westbrook. Miss Rodriguez, she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. My name is Director Sarah Blackwood. We've been looking forward to meeting you both. Elena felt Alexander's hand tighten around hers. As their worst fears materialized before their eyes, there would be no escape this time. Don't be afraid, Director Blackwood continued. Stepping into the room, we're here to help you understand what you are, and more importantly, how you can help your country. The choice was no longer theirs to make. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Alexander said, his voice taking on a commanding tone he used in hostile business negotiations. We have no idea what you're talking about, Director. Blackwood laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Mr. Westbrook, in the past 2 weeks, 7 of your business contacts have reported miraculous improvements to chronic health conditions. After meeting with you, Miss Rodriguez, the Roosevelt Elementary School has reported a 98% decrease in student sick days. Since your return from medical leave, please don't insult our intelligence. She gestured to one of her agents, who placed a tablet on Dr. Martinez's desk. The screen showed thermal imaging footage of Elena and Alexander in the hospital room, their bodies glowing with an energy signature unlike anything Elena had ever seen. We've been monitoring unusual electromagnetic phenomena for 3 decades. Director Blackwood continued. What we discovered here last week represents the most significant advancement in human evolution we've ever documented. Evolution, Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. You're not freaks or anomalies. You're the next step in human development, and you're not alone. Blackwood swiped to another screen showing similar thermal signatures from around the world. We've identified 12 individuals globally with abilities similar to yours. Some can heal. Others can influence growth in plants. A few can affect electronic systems. Alexander stood protectively in front of Elena. What do you want from us? Cooperation, study, understanding. Blackwood's expression softened slightly. Mr. Westbrook, imagine what you could do for humanity. Hospitals could be emptied. Terminal diseases could become extinct. Miss Rodriguez, children would never suffer from illness again. And if we refuse? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Then you become a threat to national security. Unregistered individuals with the power to heal could just as easily learn to harm. We can't allow that kind of uncertainty to exist. Dr. Martinez stepped forward courageously. These people saved lives. They're not weapons. Doctor, with respect, you have no idea what they're capable of. Neither do they. Blackwood turned back to Elena and Alexander. We're offering you a chance to explore your abilities in a controlled environment, to learn from others like you. The alternative is much less pleasant. Alexander felt Elena's hand trembling in his. Through their connection, he could sense her fear, but also her growing anger at being treated like a laboratory specimen. We need time to think, Alexander said. I'm afraid time is a luxury we can't afford. Blackwood nodded to her agents. Mr. Westbrook, Miss Rodriguez, you're coming with us. For your own protection, of course. As the agents moved forward, Elena felt something surge within her, a power she'd never experienced before. The lights in the room began to flicker wildly, and she could swear she felt Alexander's energy merging with hers. Elena, Alexander whispered, urgently, whatever you're feeling, try to control it. But Elena was beyond control. The thought of being separated from Alexander, of being caged and studied like an animal, ignited something primal within her. The connection between them blazed brighter than ever before, and that's when the real power awakened. The fluorescent lights exploded in a shower of sparks as Elena's power surged beyond anything she'd experienced before. Every piece of electronic equipment in the room, monitors, computers, even the agent's communication devices, began sparking and smoking. The thermal imaging tablet in Director Blackwood's hands cracked down the middle, its screen going dark. Impossible, Blackwood breathed, backing toward the door as Alexander moved to Elena's side. The moment Alexander touched Elena's shoulder, the energy between them amplified exponentially. Elena could feel his healing power merging with something else inside her, something that had been dormant until this moment of desperate fear. Through the walls, they could hear medical equipment throughout the hospital beginning to malfunction. Elena, breathe, Alexander said softly, his voice cutting through her panic. You're not just healing anymore. You're controlling energy itself. I can't stop it. Elena gasped, feeling power coursing through her like electricity through water. It's too strong. Director Blackwood spoke rapidly into her dead radio, then cursed when no sound emerged. Initiate Containment Protocol 7, she shouted to her. Agents, full electromagnetic suppression. One of the agents pulled out what looked like a modified taser, but as he aimed it at Elena, the device sparked and died in his hands. Her electromagnetic field was now so strong that it was interfering with anything electronic within a 50-foot radius. This changes everything, Alexander realized, his mind racing through the implications. Elena, you're not just a healer, you're something else entirely. Through their connected hands, Elena suddenly felt Alexander's memories flooding her mind, flashes of his childhood at the orphanage, but not the memories he'd shared with her. These were different, suppressed memories of strange visitors in dark suits, medical tests he'd been forced to undergo, papers with his photograph and the word subject stamped in red letters. Alexander, Elena whispered in horror. They've been watching you your whole life. Alexander's face went white as the blocked memories came rushing back. The adoption attempts that always fell through at the last minute. The routine medical checkups that were anything but routine. The foster families who returned me after strange accident. Director Blackwood's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked almost like fear. You're remembering. That wasn't supposed to happen for another 10 years. You knew about him as a child. Dr. Martinez demanded, his medical ethics outraged. We've been monitoring enhanced individuals for 30 years. Doctor, Mr. Westbrook was our first confirmed case. We've been preparing for this moment since he was 5 years old. Elena felt a surge of protective fury that made the remaining functional lights in the hallway flicker ominously. You experimented on him as a child. We studied him carefully, ethically. Blackwood's voice was defensive. We always knew he would eventually find others like himself. The electromagnetic resonance between enhanced individuals creates an exponential increase in abilities. That's why we needed to act quickly. Alexander's healing power and Elena's electromagnetic manipulation were feeding off each other, creating something neither the government nor they themselves understood. Around them, the hospital's electrical systems continued to surge and fail in waves. We have to go, Alexander said urgently, now, before backup arrives. But as they moved toward the door, Elena felt something that made her freeze in terror. Through her expanding electromagnetic senses, she could detect electronic signatures throughout the building, dozens of them, closing in from all directions. It's too late, she whispered. We're surrounded. That's when Alexander made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Elena, I need you to trust me completely, Alexander said, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. Can you extend your electromagnetic field to cover both of us? I don't know how to control it, Elena replied, feeling the power crackling between them like lightning contained in a bottle. You don't need to control it. Just let it grow. Let it follow our connection. Alexander pulled her closer, and Elena gasped as she felt their abilities truly merge for the first time. His healing energy seemed to stabilize her electromagnetic chaos, while her power amplified his beyond anything he'd imagined possible. Through the walls, they could sense the electronic signatures of approaching agents' radios, weapons, surveillance equipment, all moving closer in a coordinated pattern designed to trap them. Mr. Westbrook, Director Blackwood said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. You don't understand what you're risking. Uncontrolled electromagnetic surges can damage critical hospital equipment, patients could die. Then you should have thought of that before you cornered us, Alexander replied coldly. But Elena could feel his genuine concern for the innocent people in the building through their connection. I can shield the medical equipment, Elena realized suddenly. Her understanding of her power is expanding in real time. I can create a protective field around the patients while disrupting everything else. Dr. Martinez stared at them in amazement. You can target specific systems. We can together, Alexander answered. Elena, picture the hospital in your mind. Feel for the life-supporting equipment versus the surveillance gear. Elena closed her eyes and extended her senses. Through her electromagnetic awareness, she could map the entire building, every monitor, every radio, every hidden camera that government agents had installed. But she could also sense something else, the warm, healing energy emanating from Alexander, showing her which devices were keeping people alive versus which ones were being used to track and capture them. I could see everything, Elena whispered in wonder, every electronic device in a 4-block radius. Then let's give them something to really worry about, Alexander said grimly. Elena focused her power with surgical precision throughout the hospital. Surveillance cameras went dark, radio communications died, and the agents' weapon systems failed simultaneously. But the life support machines, heart monitors, and critical medical equipment remained untouched, protected by her careful control. In the distance, they could hear shouts of confusion as the government agents found themselves blind and unable to communicate. Impressive, Director Blackwood admitted, though her eyes held a new wariness. But you can't run forever. We have resources you can't imagine. Maybe, Alexander agreed. But you're making a critical error in your calculations, which is, you're assuming we want to hide from you, Elena said, opening her eyes with new determination. But what if we don't? What if we decide to show the world exactly what we can do? Alexander smiled, understanding her thought immediately. Imagine if the public knew that the government had been hiding people who could cure cancer, heal the dying, and solve the healthcare crisis. How do you think voters would react to that information? Blackwood's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. The panic alone would. Would what? Did people hope? Elena stepped forward, her power crackling around her like visible electricity. You've spent 30 years hiding us, studying us in secret, treating us like weapons or lab rats. But we're not your property. You're making a terrible mistake, Blackwood warned. There are others like you who chose to cooperate. They have resources, training, support. Alone, you're vulnerable. We're not alone, Alexander said firmly, taking Elena's hand. We have each other, and we have something you'll never understand, which is love, Elena said simply, real love that makes us stronger together than anything your research could create. As if responding to her words, their combined energy field expanded, encompassing Dr. Martinez and filling him with a warm, healing light that repaired decades of stress damage to his body in seconds. Dear God, Dr. Martinez breathed, staring at his hands in amazement. I can feel it, every ache, every pain I've carried for years, it's gone. Director Blackwood's expression shifted to something between fear and desperate hunger. Do you see what you could accomplish if you worked with us? Imagine that power amplified, refined, applied systematically, under your control, Alexander said coldly. Never again, Elena felt a surge of clarity as their powers reached perfect harmony. We know what we have to do, but neither of them was prepared for the voice that suddenly echoed in their minds, not through sound, but through the same electromagnetic connection they shared with each other. Don't trust the government, the mental voice said urgently, but don't trust your own power either. You're not the first, you won't be the last. Find us before they find you again. Elena and Alexander stared at each other in shock. Someone else like them was out there, and they were trying to make contact. The real adventure was just beginning. 6 months later, Elena stood on the balcony of a secluded cabin in the mountains of Colorado, watching Alexander tend to a garden that grew with impossible abundance. They had found the other 7 individuals scattered across the country who possessed variations of their gifts. Together, they had formed something the government's classified files now referred to as the Collective. Any word from Maria today? Alexander asked, straightening from the tomato plants that had grown 3 feet overnight under his care. She successfully healed 6 children at the Chicago Children's Hospital before disappearing again. Elena replied, monitoring communications through her expanded electromagnetic abilities. David managed to restore power to 3 small towns after the hurricane, and Sarah, Sarah is doing something with plant genetics that has agricultural scientists baffled. They had made a decision that terrified Director Blackwood and her superiors. Instead of hiding, they had gone public in the most subtle way possible. No dramatic revelations or press conferences. Instead, they appeared wherever healing was needed, most disaster zones, hospitals, areas struck by disease, or famine, performed what observers could only call miracles, and vanished before official investigations could begin. The government couldn't expose them without revealing their own 30-year cover-up. The media called them the healing angels, though they never stayed long enough to be photographed clearly. Religious groups proclaimed them proof of divine intervention. Scientists demanded investigations that never materialized. Elena, Alexander said softly, setting down his gardening tools, "Are you happy, really happy?" Elena turned from her monitoring to look at the man who had changed her life in every possible way. In 6 months, Alexander had transformed from a lonely billionaire CEO into someone who used his vast resources to coordinate their underground network of healing. His business empire now served as the perfect cover for moving people and resources around the globe. "More than I ever imagined possible," Eleanor replied honestly. Do you ever miss your old life?" Alexander laughed, the sound rich and genuine in a way it never had been during his corporate years. "Miss being lonely? Miss feeling empty despite having everything money could buy? Miss not knowing what I was truly capable of?" He shook his head. "Elena, for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Elena felt that familiar warm flow between them, stronger than ever after months of learning to work in perfect harmony. Their love had become the foundation for abilities that continued to grow and evolve. Where Alexander could heal physical ailments, Elena had learned to repair damaged nervous systems and even restore lost memories. Together, they could accomplish things that neither could achieve alone. "Contact from Dr. Martinez," Elena announced, sensing the familiar electromagnetic signature of his encrypted communication device. "He says 3 more potential enhanced individuals have appeared at St. Mary's, all showing preliminary signs of abilities under stress situations. Natural emergence or government experimentation?" Alexander asked, immediately shifting into planning mode. "Unknown, but he thinks we should investigate." Carefully, Alexander nodded, then pulled Elena into his arms. "Before we plan our next rescue mission, there's something I need to ask you." Elena felt her heart skip as Alexander dropped to one knee, pulling out a ring that seemed to sparkle with inner light, not because of any special properties, but because of what it represented. "Elena Rodriguez, you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You showed me what love really means, helped me discover who I really am, and gave me a purpose worth living for." Alexander's green eyes were bright with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she nodded, unable to speak past the overwhelming joy in her chest. As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, their combined energy field expanded outward, touching every living thing in a half-mile radius. Sick animals in the forest felt their pain ease. Dying trees burst into new growth. Even the mountain itself seemed to respond. Natural springs bubbling up from deep underground. "Yes," Elena finally managed to whisper. "Yes, forever and always." As they kissed, their electromagnetic signature blazed across the sky like a beacon, visible to anyone with the right equipment for monitoring enhanced individuals. In a classified facility 300 miles away, Director Blackwood stared at the energy readings with a mixture of fear and amazement. "Sir," her assistant said nervously, "the readings are off the charts. Whatever they're doing up there, their combined power level just increased by a factor of 10. Blackwood smiled coldly. "Perfect. Now we know exactly where they are, and more importantly, we know that emotional stress amplifies their abilities exponentially." She turned to address the figure standing in the shadows. Behind her, someone Elena and Alexander had never seen, but whose presence had been felt in every government operation targeting enhanced individuals. "Dr. Kane, initiate Operation Unity. It's time to bring our children home." The man stepped into the light, revealing a face that was startlingly familiar, the same green eyes as Alexander, the same strong jawline, but aged and marked by decades of classified work. "I've waited 32 years to meet my son properly," Dr. Kane said quietly. "I suppose it's time Alexander learned the truth about his family and about why he was really abandoned at that orphanage." As Elena and Alexander celebrated their engagement, neither realized that the greatest test of their love and abilities was about to begin. The government wasn't just hunting them anymore. Alexander's own father was leading the chase. But love, they had learned, could overcome impossible odds, and together, Elena and Alexander had become something more powerful than anything the world had ever seen. Their story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.